Tonight, we begin with a military strike that U.S. intelligence officials had feared, Israeli defense planners had prepared for, and the entire Middle East had dreaded. A strike that unfolded not over weeks of negotiation, but in a single devastating night. Hours that sent oil prices soaring to $180 a barrel. Hours that triggered emergency sessions at the United Nations. Hours that brought two nuclear-capable nations to the brink of open war. What Israel did today crossed a line that Washington had hoped would hold. And when that line broke, Iran did not hesitate. They responded with threats, mobilization, and promises of devastating retaliation. For months now, there had been signals, not from official channels, not from diplomatic communiques, just signals, that Iran was preparing something unprecedented at its nuclear facilities. Iran has been defiant, yes, but they have been calculated in their defiance. Their moves have followed a certain pattern, a rhythm, almost a predictability. But what set off alarm bells in Washington and Tel Aviv this week was that the pattern went silent. Intelligence analysts who monitor Iranian nuclear activity know the indicators: the movement of advanced centrifuges to underground bunkers, the increased Revolutionary Guard presence around Natanz and Fordo, the sudden restrictions placed on IAEA inspectors, the communications blackout between key facilities. All of that went quiet. And whenever Iran goes quiet, it means something is about to get very, very loud. Early yesterday morning, Israeli intelligence detected what they described as final stage enrichment activity, including uranium processing, at levels that had not been recorded in over a decade. These are the kinds of activities that Iran only undertakes when they are signaling something very specific: weapons-grade capability, imminent breakout, or deliberate provocation. Western intelligence agencies didn't know which category this fell into, or whether it fell into all three at once. But what they did know was that Iran was changing its nuclear posture. And when a threshold state shifts posture without explanation, even by small measures, every intelligence agency on the planet pays attention. Because small measures in nuclear programs don't stay small for long. The warning issued by Washington tonight was not normal. It was not routine. And it was not symbolic. It was urgent. Officials, after emergency National Security Council briefings, described Iran's enrichment breach as provocative, destabilizing, and perhaps most importantly, irreversible without direct intervention. But warnings only work if the target hesitates. Israel did not. In fact, their response today was among the most aggressive and precise military operations we've seen in modern Middle Eastern history. Here's what we know. Within 6 hours of confirming Iran's enrichment breach, Israel launched Operation Iron Dawn. These weren't the limited surgical strikes we've seen in Syria over the years. These were coordinated, multi-wave aerial assaults, F-35 Ayadir stealth fighters, Jericho 3 ballistic missiles, and cyber operations that Israel only deploys when they are preparing to fundamentally alter a threat landscape. Tonight, the Israeli Defense Forces confirmed that they launched precision strikes on multiple Iranian nuclear sites, including the Fordo enrichment facility that had recently been expanded deeper underground for what analysts believe was final stage weapons development. Israel struck before Iran could fully activate its Russian-supplied S-400 air defense network. They hit Natanz. They hit Fordo. They hit the Arak heavy water reactor that intelligence suggested was preparing for plutonium production. They hit Isfahan's uranium conversion facility. In other words, Israel targeted the entire infrastructure chain of Iran's nuclear weapons program. The centrifuges that would have enriched uranium to weapons grade, and the facilities that would have assembled a device, the command centers coordinating the entire program. This is what made Washington's warning so urgent. Iran's latest enrichment activity wasn't just symbolic. It was actionable. It represented the kind of breakthrough that could produce a functioning nuclear weapon within weeks if left unchecked, And Israel, understanding that fully, responded with overwhelming force, not recklessly, not impulsively, but strategically. They didn't target civilian infrastructure. They didn't strike population centers. They didn't hit mosques or hospitals. They hit enrichment facilities. They hit military command nodes. They hit the nuclear program itself, and only the nuclear program. And here's where the story becomes even more alarming. Intelligence officials now believe that Iran's latest enrichment push was designed to test the resolve of the international community after months of stalled Vienna negotiations. Iran wanted to see whether the West would condemn, but ultimately accept their nuclear threshold status. They wanted to see whether Israel would be restrained by American pressure. But instead, the opposite happened. Israel didn't issue statements. Israel didn't call for more sanctions. Israel didn't wait for another round of diplomacy. They launched a military operation that was so precise, so devastating, that even hardliners in Tehran noticed. You don't get Iran's attention easily, but today, Israel did. Now, a defense analyst speaking with international media under anonymity described Iran's strategy as nuclear blackmail, a way to force Western concessions through the implicit threat of weapons capability. But Israel proved today that they remain both capable and willing. Their strikes were not only militarily effective, they were timed so precisely that Iranian air defenses were still activating when the first facilities were already burning. That timing matters because it shows intelligence penetration at the highest levels of Iran's nuclear program. It shows that Israel is not merely reacting to Iranian moves. They are anticipating them. They are inside Iran's decision cycle. As reports continued coming in throughout the night, and we learned more about the staggering scale of Israel's operation. Israeli Air Force jets carried out over 100 sorties across Iranian airspace, forcing air defenses into complete saturation and overload. Unit 8200, Israel's Cyber Command, targeted Iranian military communications networks that had been upgraded with Chinese technology in the last 6 months. Israeli Navy submarines operating in the Arabian Sea reportedly launched cruise missiles at coastal radar installations. This wasn't just a military strike. This wasn't just a warning shot across the bow. This was strategic decapitation. This was capability destruction on a massive scale, and capability destruction is the one thing Iran has struggled to recover from since the Stuxnet cyber attacks over a decade ago. For every advancement they have made in enrichment, Israel has countered with something that sets the program back years. Tonight was no exception. Remember, Iran thought the world had moved on. They thought international attention was consumed by Ukraine and Taiwan. They thought economic pressures and war fatigue would prevent Israel from acting unilaterally. They thought American political divisions meant Washington couldn't support such an operation. But tonight, the exact opposite is happening. The world is watching the Middle East with undivided attention. Israel acted decisively without waiting for international permission. Washington is publicly calling for restraint while privately sharing intelligence. And the economic pressures, oil at $180 per barrel, are now hitting every nation on earth. What makes this moment so dangerous and so unpredictable is that Iran's latest nuclear push happened at a time when Supreme Leader Khamenei is under extraordinary domestic pressure. Hardliners in the Revolutionary Guard want nuclear weapons capability immediately. Reformist factions want economic relief through renewed negotiations. The IRGC wants expanded regional dominance through proxy networks. And the Iranian population, crushed by sanctions, wants basic economic stability and freedom. Khamenei has been balancing these impossible demands while facing the most significant military strike against Iranian territory in the Islamic Republic's entire history. And when leaders in that position face sudden, catastrophic attacks, they don't respond from strength. They respond from pressure. They respond from vulnerability. They respond from desperation. And desperate leaders make dangerous decisions. Section J, Official Response. 2 minutes. Washington's emergency statement, now circulating through every diplomatic channel worldwide, was designed to signal that the United States is not willing to allow regional escalation into full-scale war. Secretary of State officials said plainly that Iran's enrichment activities were fundamentally inconsistent with any peaceful nuclear development program. That is diplomatic language for, "We knew they were building a bomb, and we have the evidence." The Pentagon has raised readiness levels across Central Command. The USS Gerald Ford Carrier Strike Group is repositioning in the Eastern Mediterranean. You don't usually see that level of coordinated response unless something genuinely serious is at stake. Meanwhile, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu addressed the nation in a brief, defiant speech carried on all networks. He said, "Israel will never wait for a threat to become a tragedy." He said, "We have acted tonight to protect not only our nation, but the entire free world from a nuclear blackmail." And he said, "To our enemies everywhere, know that we see you, we reach you, and we will stop you before you stop us." These are not rhetorical flourishes. These are not campaign slogans. These are statements from a wartime leader who understands precisely how high the stakes have become. Here's what makes the situation even more concerning. Israel's strikes weren't the only military activity in the region tonight. Along with the nuclear facility attacks, Hezbollah forces in southern Lebanon have mobilized artillery units along the Israeli northern border. Iranian-backed Kataib, Hezbollah militias in Iraq have threatened American bases in Erbil and Al-Assad. Houthi rebels in Yemen launched a wave of drones toward Saudi Aramco facilities and Red Sea shipping lanes. All of this happened within the same 12-hour window. When Iran activates multiple proxy networks simultaneously, it means something much larger is being coordinated. This is not coincidence. This is strategy. Analysts are now considering several terrifying possibilities. One is that Iran will launch direct ballistic missile strikes against Israeli population centers, something they have never done before. Another is that Iran will activate its entire proxy network for a coordinated, multi-front regional assault designed to overwhelm Israeli defenses. A third possibility, and the one worrying intelligence officials the most, is that Iran will attempt to rush whatever remaining enriched uranium it possesses toward an emergency weapons test, hoping to establish deterrence before Israel can strike again. But today, Israel took the primary pathway off the table. They didn't wait for diplomatic solutions that weren't coming. They didn't rely on sanctions that weren't working. They didn't hope for Iranian restraint that never existed. They struck first. They struck hard. And they struck comprehensively. What we're watching now is a test of the entire regional order. Iran wants to see if it can survive this devastating strike and emerge with its regional influence intact. Israel wants to demonstrate that nuclear threats will always be met with military action, regardless of international opinion. The United States wants desperately to prevent a full-scale Middle Eastern war that could drag in American forces. And the global economy wants to prevent $180 oil from triggering a worldwide recession. These objectives are not compatible. Something has to give. Tonight, we've heard from Pentagon officials who are monitoring Iranian military movements in real time via satellite and signals intelligence. They say Revolutionary Guard missile units are repositioning across the country. They say Shahab 3 medium-range ballistic missiles are being fueled and elevated on mobile launchers. And they say Iran's decision to maintain public silence in the immediate aftermath is almost certainly part of a calculated strategy intended to maximize psychological impact when retaliation finally comes. But Israel is not standing down. In fact, Israel is reinforcing. Iron Dome batteries are at maximum readiness. Arrow 3 anti-ballistic missile systems are tracking Iranian airspace. David's Sling units are deployed along every border. Israel's response today, swift, precise, and devastating, sent an unmistakable message to Iran that the era of nuclear blackmail has ended. And it sent a message to the entire world that Israel will act alone when its survival is threatened. As the hours unfold, we expect more details to emerge about what exactly Iran hoped to achieve with its accelerated enrichment program. But what we do know is that Israel's strike was timely. It destroyed critical nuclear infrastructure. It set back weapons development capability by years, possibly decades, and it demonstrated to the world that red lines still exist and that some nations will enforce them. What happens next will depend entirely on what Iran decides in the next 72 hours. If they choose strategic restraint, this moment may be remembered as the night nuclear proliferation was prevented in the Middle East. If they choose escalation, Israel and its allies have already demonstrated they are fully prepared. They have shown they are ready. They have shown they will respond. And tonight, for the first time in decades, Tehran is silent. The Revolutionary Guard is quiet. The supreme leader has not spoken. Too quiet. And when Iran is quiet after an attack like this, it means they are calculating. It means they are choosing their response with extreme care. Because tonight, the Islamic Republic learned something it has learned before but keeps forgetting. Israel will not wait for permission. Israel will not negotiate while centrifuges spin. And Israel will strike first when survival is at stake. This story is far from over. But tonight, 3 things are absolutely clear. The Middle East has fundamentally changed. The nuclear calculus has shifted forever. And the entire world is holding its breath. We will be here, covering every development as the next phase of this crisis unfolds.